In this problem, we're going to find the sine of the difference of two angles, where the two angles are represented by inverse trigonometric functions. We have the sine of the inverse sine of 3/5 minus the inverse cosine of -4/5. Again, we want to think of this as the sine of alpha minus beta, where alpha is the inverse sine of 3/5 and beta is the inverse cosine of -4/5. This means that the sine of the angle alpha is 3/5, where alpha is an angle between -pi/2 and pi/2. What we need to do is use the fact that sine of alpha equals 3/5 to find the cosine of alpha. The cosine of alpha is plus or minus the square root of 1 minus the sine squared of alpha. Now we know that alpha is between -pi/2 and pi/2, which means that we're either in the first or the fourth quadrant. It doesn't matter because the cosine function is positive in either of those quadrants. So when we find the cosine of alpha, it's going to be the positive square root of 1 minus the sine squared of alpha. But the sine of alpha is 3/5, so I have 1 minus 3/5 quantity squared. If I work this out, I get that the cosine of alpha is 4/5. Here, we want to know the angle beta such that its inverse is -4/5, or the inverse cosine is -4/5. Put another way, the cosine of what angle beta equals -4/5. Here, beta is between 0 and pi inclusive, because that's the domain restriction on the cosine function to make it 1 to 1. Well, we know that the sine of beta is going to be the positive square root of 1 minus the cosine squared of beta. It's the positive square root because beta is between 0 and pi. In other words, beta is in the first or the second quadrant, and the sine function is positive in both of those quadrants. So I get that the sine of beta is 1 minus -4/5 quantity squared. If we work this out, we get that the sine of beta is 3/5. Now what I'm going to do is find the sine of alpha minus beta. Remember, the sine of alpha minus beta is the sine of alpha times the cosine of beta minus the cosine of alpha times the sine of beta. I need to substitute in these values of sine alpha, cosine alpha, sine beta, cosine beta into this formula to get the answer. So we have, again, sine of alpha minus beta is going to equal the sine of alpha, which is 3/5, times the cosine of beta, -4/5, minus the cosine of alpha, 4/5, times the sine of beta, 3/5. So now we're going to work this all out, and we get -12/25 minus 12/25 is -24/25.